Well, welcome in once again to another Johnny Torch live broadcast. I usually announce the number of the broadcast, but I forgot to put that information in. I guess I'll put it in post. But I wasn't even going to do this one as a live broadcast, but I felt like I owed it to you guys to do a live show. Back like we used to do it in the old days, the only way to spend your Saturday here with us on the Johnny Torch program. We're going to do a ranking video. That sounds fun. I haven't done a ranking video in quite some time. There's a lot of them that I'd like to do, but you kind of need to do a lot of preparation for it. In this case, we're only going to limit our subject to 5. We got 5 franchisees that we're going to see how they handle doing a next generation spin-off. And we're going to rank them from worst to best. And right off the bat, first I want to say, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Make sure, and we've got a lot of subscribers coming along, and I'm very happy for that. That's why I want to see if I can get some more content on for you guys. Knowing that the holidays are coming up, I know it's not going to be feasible for me in the near future to be doing too much more new content, but we're going to see if we can get a few things going before Thanksgiving, before Christmas, before the holidays kick in. So we're going to start here with this broadcast. Please check out the link in the description below. Check out our comic, The Adventures of Bullets Bourbon Private Eye. It's an all-ages action extravaganza about a down-on-his-luck private eye who takes on the most colorful collection of villains imaginable in each and every issue to protect Stark City from the forces of evil. All right, with that out of the way, let's get to the topic at hand. First off, there is a notable omission. Now, the criteria I picked for this project is, on the one hand, I didn't want to do animated series. So I toyed with the idea of having Batman Beyond in here because that's what we're talking about. Something that is a generations after sequel to an existing show. Batman Beyond being the Batman, the animated series sequel, and the sequel to basically Batman and the whole DC animated universe. I chose to go against that. We're going to try to keep the show streamlined, and I didn't want to go off the rails with that. Also, notably absent is going to be Star Trek. Now, I think Star Trek is the poster child of probably doing it right and how you do a next generation spinoff series, and how you keep the ball rolling in that case. The problem with it is I didn't feel like there is enough connectivity to the original Star Trek with the next generation. It was purposefully set, I believe it was 78 years after the, I don't know if it's 78 years after the events of Undiscovered Country, something like that. So in other words, the original cast was not going to be involved heavily with the new characters. Nobody's related. Nobody was a colleague of theirs. Of course, certain characters did show up later on. Dr. McCoy, of course, being very old in the pilot. Spock shows up later on. And we all know the characters that end up showing up. But those are more like guest spots to me. That really isn't a direct reflection of it being a spinoff and dealing with characters and the progeny of characters and the legacy of characters and all that. I don't think that the next generation really qualifies. Now, it's a great show, and the movies were pretty great, most of them anyway, but it doesn't qualify for what we're doing. All right, so we've got 5 franchisees, and we're going to go from worst to best. I think you're all going to know what the worst is in this case. All right, so number 5, the worst possible example I could use of a franchise dropping the ball with their next generation project is, of course, the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Now, this is a textbook definition of how not to do a sequel trilogy spinoff. Now, to their credit, if I can give them any credit whatsoever, I think the original idea was to introduce some concepts that George Lucas himself had written and approved. I think there was always going to be a female Padawan to Luke Skywalker. There was always going to be, I think, a Jedi offspring of Han and Leia. Some of these concepts, I think, can be traced back to George Lucas. I don't think they completely spun them out of whole cloth. But that's where I have to completely divorce any kind of credit from them whatsoever, because it was a disaster. Now, the biggest problem is, of course, there was no game plan. There was no game plan whatsoever for this series. The trilogy was intended to be handled by a different director each time. I think Colin Trevorrow was supposed to be the director of the third installment. They went back to J.J. Abrams because after Roundhead Rian Johnson famously dropped the ball on The Last Jedi and completely shattered whatever Abrams had set up, Trevorrow was like, I cannot even with this, basically, and just threw up his hands and said, you're on your own. The problems were there before Rian Johnson. I'll take the movies one at a time, and, it's good to go over this once in a while, and because if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it, as they say. There was no game plan. They didn't have a full through line, starting with The Force Awakens, because J.J. Abrams does not contemplate what it is to have a full story. He deals with his mystery box crap. He did not want to answer how Luke Skywalker was going to fit into the picture. He did not want to answer how Snoke came to be and how he was going to end up being the big bad and what was the ramifications of Ben Solo becoming a Sith. He just completely dropped the ball. All he did was have fun with bringing back Han Solo, which I admit was fun, and Chewie for another adventure. That's where this pretty much succeeded. It gets successively worse, but it succeeded in basically setting up, which is what Abrams really does well, setting up the universe, and with the hope that someone could tell a better tale later on down the line. Again, we could go through in detail all the problems, but the main one to me is they did not bring in Luke Skywalker in the first movie. The idea was to have the first movie reflect Han, second movie reflect Luke, and the third movie reflect Leia. That is not how you do a generational film. When you're handing off the torch, when you're passing the baton, so to speak, it doesn't go to... if anything, what you would do is try to phase out the old cast gradually instead of giving each member of the original trilogy a film of their own. So we have Han back in the smuggling racket at 70 plus years old. He's estranged from his wife. You've completely ruined the story, the beautiful love story there was between them in the original trilogy, in the first movie. Now, this is done in the first movie. That's why I always say the destruction of Star Wars happened in The Force Awakens. It didn't wait until The Last Jedi came when, Rian Johnson took a nuclear bomb to the thing. J.J. Abrams had already taken a jackhammer to it so that the pieces were already broken, and, all it took was Rian Johnson to scatter them to the wind. When, the original cast not meeting again was a disastrous idea, especially when you knew that Harrison Ford wasn't going to stick around for all three movies. It was sort of a prerequisite for him that he was going to die. He wanted to die as far back, I think, as Empire. He wanted to die at the end of that. Lucas convinced him to come back for Return of the Jedi, and sort of as a favor to him for, getting him involved in Star Wars and Indiana Jones and basically making him a household name, he returned for Jedi. But he didn't really want to play this character, and he took the paycheck, of course, and the provision was that they were really going to just do away with him by the end of the movie. So we kind of knew that was going to happen. Knowing that's going to happen and not have him interact with Luke and Leia, to a larger extent with Leia than just the one scene I think they have together, and then Lando. They bring Lando in basically in the third installment just as a afterthought, really, because there was nobody else left. And you've already tainted the well for this project. Now we'll jump over quickly to The Last Jedi. They complete character assassination of Luke Skywalker. This is what you don't do when you're trying to do a generational thing. You don't try to reach back and undo what was done in the previous films. Luke Skywalker did not reflect the original trilogy Luke Skywalker whatsoever in The Last Jedi. He's become a cranky old man like Uncle Owen. What we found at the end of Return of the Jedi is that he had become Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was the epitome of what the Jedi was supposed to represent. And he was not even fully trained in the way that the traditional Jedi was, but he became the epitome of the Jedi. There was so much to work with that. What does a new Grand Jedi Master look like after we left him, whatever this was, 30 years ago? What position would he be in now? Would he have a whole new recruit, a whole new team of recruits and Jedi and council and everything? No, he has done absolutely nothing in the intervening years. He, I guess, tried to get a Jedi Academy going. It got ruined, and he just quit and became a recluse. That's basically what they tell us. Of course, because of Kathleen Kennedy, Princess Leia is the only one that's given any kind of reasonably good treatment. Of course, now she's called General Leia because we can't reflect on her being feminine and noble and royalty and this and that. Sadly, she passed on, Carrie Fisher, before Rise of Skywalker. So using some cut scenes, I think, and some computer trickery, they managed to give her something of a place in Rise of Skywalker, but not really anything substantial. Character assassination of Luke Skywalker was probably the bitterest pill to swallow in this series, and it soured Star Wars for many from this point on. I mean, I think people saw The Force Awakens and thought, okay, it's kind of a retread of the original film, the original Star Wars. We lost Han Solo. We kind of knew that was going to happen. We'll see Luke come in and kick things into overdrive, and he's going to avenge Han. Maybe we'll get some kind of a decent film out of the last two installments. And that was completely obliterated in the first, 10, 15 minutes, the first time you see Luke in the film. And its effect is disastrous. Last Jedi itself was a complete disaster of a film. They got rid of Snoke, which led to the Rise of Skywalker, bringing back Palpatine, which again undoes the end of the original trilogy. You don't undo the original trilogy in favor of the sequel trilogy. Now, I think what they were trying to do was to be clever and act like, well, in Lucas' original treatment, the Emperor was to be dealt with at the end, and we'll just bring him in and say he was cloned or something. And they played havoc with the Force, changing all kinds of things about the Force to make it palatable for something like this to happen. These things were never established by Lucas. Force healing and dyads and, transportation from one place to another through the Force. All these things were just completely foreign to Star Wars, foreign to the Force. The new cast, we got to talk about them quick before we start to wrap this up because I got to get to the next one. But the new cast would have been okay, but they had no plan for them whatsoever. Poe Dameron wasn't really going to be a player in this series. They liked the rapport he had with Finn and decided to keep him in. That was good, but what they did with him was pretty much nothing for the rest of the series. Can you remember anything interesting Poe did post Last Jedi? Last Jedi, they had him get slapped around by Leia and, what's her name, Admiral Holdo. And that's the only thing that's memorable at that he was emasculated. Then you got Rise of Skywalker. I don't remember what happened with him in that movie. Nothing. Finn, nearly the same thing. They kind of tried to build up an interesting story about what happens when a former stormtrooper defects. He's taken in by the Resistance, and maybe, we'll find out who his family is. Is his father Lando, which was something I was thinking of. Maybe they were saving that for that. Nothing really interesting is done with him. He's played for laughs a lot in The Last Jedi. And again, I don't remember Rise of Skywalker enough to tell you exactly what they did with the resolution of his character. Rey, of course, became the poster target of Mary Sue's. She can do everything. You don't need 3PO and R2 because she's a mechanic and she can understand every language. You don't need Chewie. She can fly the Falcon. You don't need really anyone to teach her to use the Force because she's so gifted. And again, bad storytelling right there and bad screenwriting. The fact that she was a nobody, I didn't think that was really a problem when Rian Johnson established that, because the only one she could really be related to was Han and Leia, and they didn't really make that an option. Although I guess you could, as poorly as these films were written, go back and sort of insert that. But she became a Palpatine, and again, it was just a very mixed up way. The only next generation character who's a blood tie to any of these characters is Ben Solo, who becomes Kylo Ren, who dies at the end of the saga, at the end of this trilogy. How do you carry on with another generation when there is no living active member of the Skywalker family now? It always went back to the Skywalkers up to the first half hour of The Phantom Menace. It's always been about the Skywalkers. What is it going to be about now? It's going to be about a Palpatine, if they do ever end up making another movie in this timeline, which I'm beginning to doubt. It's going to be about a Palpatine who's been self-adopted as a Skywalker. Terrible trilogy, terrible conception, just no thought whatsoever to it. Absolutely every mistake that could be made doing a next generation series was done here. And this is the poster child of the worst of the worst of next generation sequels / spin-offs. All right. So with that underway, with that out of the way, if I got all that out of my system, then, I mean, if I was to rank these, I'm saying 5. I mean, that would be like a D, not even D. That would be an F. That would be a failure, a complete failure. There is no way whatsoever there was any redeeming qualities about that. Once in a while, I try to twist my arm to try to see if I can put like Rise of Skywalker in. I mean, I feel like it was entertaining enough if you didn't know anything about Star Wars that might have been an okay movie. But knowing what you know about Star Wars, it completely spits in the face of everything Star Wars. The rules are not the same. The characters are not in any way connected to the original trilogy. And it's so very disappointing. I just got to go on. But that's an F. If there is any way that you could possibly rank it, it has to be a failure. Next, we have one this is number 4 from the worst to best on how they handled franchises with the next generation. This one is a little bit different, but it's still, I would say, a failure. Now, we have the post-Endgame Avengers. Now, this is a little bit different, where this is not a sort of next generation where there is a blood relative sort of taking over, as we had in the last one, the next generation. This is basically, these characters have been handed off the baton of the original Avengers. Gone is Iron Man, Captain America. We still had some other characters there, as you see. We had Doctor Strange, Spider-Man. But a lot of these characters have been recast, so to speak, as Sam Wilson as Captain America and Shuri as Black Panther. And we sort of have, the Hulk as a supporting character for She-Hulk. She-Hulk becomes the more important character in the MCU. We have oh man, I can't remember the name of this character. Shang-Chi. Excuse me. We have Shang-Chi and sort of our buildup of new characters. Basically, they took everything that was memorable and notable about the Avengers and left them. Now, what we've got coming up here with the new Avengers, quote unquote, which is what we had with Yelena again, not really a blood relative, but an adoptive relative. We have, Bucky. He's like a holdover from the original. So this is why this constitutes a next generation project. Are they going to bring back any of the original characters? We'll have to find out in Doomsday/Secret Wars. Thor is still around, and what did they do with him? They made him a laughing stock, completely an embarrassment in Thor: Love and Thunder. So again, the idea was for them to carry on when the original actors left the roles, such as Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr., and we would just carry on. We'd still have a Captain America because we have Sam Wilson. We would carry on with Iron Man with Riri Williams, Rhodey. We had other iron characters to carry on. But again, this is not what people wanted. People didn't want this in the comics. People are not going to want it now. The MCU, if Star Wars was tainted by the Force is female and Kathleen Kennedy pretty much forcing her feminist ideology into it, the MCU was ruined by the DEI hires. Namor is now Namor. And Riri Williams is going to be taking over for Iron Man, Sam Wilson as Captain America. Shang-Chi, Ms. Marvel, and it was sort of like what they did in the comics in the DEI era, where they're trying to force more diversity and inclusion and female characters, different race characters, Captain Marvel, of course, being another one. And, again, there's a lot of also-rans, like in the Thunderbolts film, that were just like spin-offs of the original MCU Avengers characters. Now, the reason why I put this one a little bit higher, not only because Star Wars sequel trilogy is obviously bottom barrel, this does have the potential to be saved. What they could do is to easily reboot it or recast the actors. Now, they killed off Iron Man. This is science fiction. This is fantasy, whatever way you want to describe it. Comic books, people die all the time. They come back all the time. This is not impossible for them to bring back a character with a different actor. Bring back a character from another timeline, from another universe. They're doing something like that with the Fantastic Four. I think there is some possibility that this is going to work out, though. I mean, a lot of people are, especially when it comes to the MCU, because of how poorly they've been, there's a lot of naysayers. There's a lot of doom and gloom. There's a lot of, this is terrible. It's been terrible for the most part. I still think there was a couple of good things that came out of recent MCU. I think Doctor Strange 2 was good. Moon Knight was all right. Daredevil Born Again I thought was very good, considering what they had to do with that. But, that's a subject for another time. So there's pieces in place, though, that can make this work if Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars will be able to resurrect some of the original characters. If they resurrect them with new actors, that's just as good. I've always said no actor is bigger than the character. People are like, don't use the Joker again. Heath Ledger was so good. Well, yeah, he was good, but the Joker is a bigger character than him. The Joker needs to exist and come back whenever Batman is in a new movie or something. We need to see another version of the Joker. Not all versions are, bad or good. There could be a different version that, takes up a different aspect of the Joker. Like, for instance, Heath Ledger's Joker was, I think, more in line with the sort of the clever and manipulative Joker that, the way he operates. The Jack Nicholson Joker was more of the traditional clown prince of crime, and doing things basically willy-nilly just for kicks. I think there's a way that you can take a different look at different characters and put the focus on something else. And I think that's possible here. Spider-Man allegedly is going to be probably the most comic accurate now in the new movie that he's going to be doing, Brand New Day. It's very possible that we can get back on track with this if they do it the right way. There's no guarantee that they will, But I think Fantastic Four, which was the last Marvel movie, I think that was a good movie. I think that was a good step in the right direction. Now, it depends on what they're going to do next with those characters. Apparently, they're going to bring them to the MCU proper. Doomsday is going to focus around Doctor Doom, the Robert Downey Jr. version, which a lot of people are, again, crying bloody murder. But I have a feeling that that's going to work out. I think that's going to be all right. And I think it's going to lead to something interesting, which I think a lot of people are just like, it was kind of like what happened with the female Silver Surfer. I think if you complain too much about, well, they're doing the DEI still and this, that, there was a reason for her to be female in that movie. Now, I still want to see a male Silver Surfer, but there was a purpose for it in that movie. Now, the same thing with RDJ as Doctor Doom. Is there a good purpose for it in that movie? There probably is. I think there is. So I want to see what they do with him first before making a judgment. Because I have a feeling it's like the comics, we go back and change things all the time in the comics. A character can go from this, that, and the other. I think Reed Richards was in the Doom armor once. It's like there's always something going on that it'll end up going back to the status quo. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. So I do feel like they probably can do something. We're going to bring in all these other characters, the Fox X-Men, probably going to bring in Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. We're going to see all these great things again. I think that if they pull it off right, we could have a pretty exciting, soft reboot, I suppose, of the MCU, which could have, new actors in familiar roles, which would do away with, Shuri as Black Panther and, Sam Wilson as Captain America and all that kind of nonsense. So the MCU post Endgame, or I would say including Endgame, has been a D. If I got to grade them, it's a D, and they are fourth on the list. All right, we're coming up to number 3 now. This is sort of middle of the road territory. This is middle of the road. I would say the way the Rocky series turned into the Creed series is kind of 50-50. I think it ended up succeeding better than I thought it would, but there are still some issues. Rocky, of course, the famous and now almost 50-year-old film in the franchise. A down on his luck boxer from Philly, and his friends and opponents, and it's stuff of legend. And when Stallone did Rocky V, he was pretty much tired of it, and it shows. He really, I don't think, was in tune with that film. His performance is off. It was directed by John Avildsen, who directed the first film, so I don't think Stallone really wanted to be bothered. He handed it off to him because, at that point he was an actor-director. He'd acted and directed in Rocky II, Rocky III, Rocky IV, and of course directed some other films. So, I mean, he is a director. He could have handled Rocky V, didn't choose to do it, and it turned into a disaster. Sitting on the franchise for several years, he finally got, the powers that be convinced that he could do another Rocky film. It would work out. He did Rocky Balboa, satisfying conclusion to the saga. Obviously, Rocky pushing 60, I think, in that film and still stepping into the ring. I wouldn't say it was implausible in this day and age. There's a lot of boxers that are still in the ring in their 50s or whatever. But, it was not going to be that. There was going to be a Rocky 7 where Rocky steps into the ring again. And so after sitting on that for a while, Creed came along. Ryan Coogler had the idea and brought it to Stallone and said, hey, I'm going to do a Rocky sequel series called Creed about the son of Apollo Creed. Stallone liked it, liked what he saw, agreed to star in it. I guess he also had to agree to have it be produced because, I mean, it was basically his creation along with, MGM had their hands in it as well. There's more on that. I guess we could talk about it at a later time. And so they made the Creed film. And the Creed film was really good. The first one was very good. See, this is kind of the backwards way of doing it. This is where you back into it. Now, a traditional Next Generation story would be Rocky's son or Rocky's grandson wants to be a boxer, and Rocky's going to train him, and Rocky's going to help him, and things will work out, and this and that. In this case, we have Rocky is just a co-star in this film. The story is not about him. It's just in his world, and he's orbiting what's going on. So again, this is not really a full, next gen reboot or next gen spinoff, but it's powerful enough in Rocky's appearance in this film to really make it a co-equal film in the Rocky series, as with Creed being his own thing, Adonis Johnson / Creed. Where it works is that it's Rocky is a equal participant in the film. Screen time, he might not have as much, but the story revolves around him. It's a continuation of him. We didn't forget about him and, try to nullify his character in favor of Creed. He's there in a completely complementary role. It's like Obi-Wan Kenobi to Luke Skywalker. Rocky is Creed's Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's his Mickey. And we deal a lot with the Rocky world. We find out that Paulie is dead, which is kind of sad because I would have liked to have him still be alive, because at this point Rocky has absolutely no one. And but that was kind of that was something in the that's a staple of the Rocky series, where somebody dies basically in every movie. And part of the problem I have when you do a next gen thing like this is the rewriting of the previous generation, the original trilogy, so to speak, the original generation, to sort of make it fit in with what you're trying to do here. Now, there's a couple of times where that happens. Again, like with Paulie being dead, it's like, well, we don't want any more ties to Rocky, because in this film, Rocky has to face his mortality, and we got to say he doesn't have anybody else, so he's kind of ready to go. And in the same way, we have to fit in the fact that Adonis Johnson is young enough to be a boxer, and still, old enough to be a boxer, but young enough to be Creed's son, or old enough to be Creed's son, young enough to be a boxer. Apollo had kids in 1979's Rocky 2, I think it was, we see them. And they were like 8, 9, something like that. And so for it to be whatever this was, 2003 or something, I don't know, his son would probably be, too old to be a contemporary boxer. So we have to change the story where Apollo had an affair just before he died, basically, in order to produce the titular character, Adonis Johnson. Now, again, you're basically having to rewrite something in order to put this story on the map. And I don't really know if that's fair to Apollo's character. I can understand if we're talking about when he was young and a hothead or something, but we're talking about at the end of his life, when he basically already had, a wife, a pretty wife and kids and everything. I kind of feel like he wouldn't be having a child out of wedlock somewhere. And does that diminish his character a little bit? Yeah, I think it does. But you don't have a story without that. And in the same way, I felt like there was some contrivances in this film where, Creed and Rocky, they kind of have a tiff or whatever, and it feels like it's kind of contrived just to give some oomph to the drama. But I like the character. I like all the characters in this. I think they bring back Duke's grandson, is it? Or is it Duke's son? Duke, the trainer of Apollo, who's the trainer of Rocky by Rocky 4. His girlfriend is an interesting character. They give her like hearing issue and this and that. So, this is kind of the way to do it. Then we go on to Creed 2. I think the wheels start falling off in Creed 2. I think the problem with this is that Creed 2 had the perfect setup. You got Drago back. You got the son of Drago versus son of Apollo. Apollo was killed by Drago. You got Rocky not really wanting to be in the corner and this and that. But the problem with this one is, and I've said this a lot, when the director or writer or filmmaker or whatever doesn't want to put the camera on the right spots. Now, we only see one interaction between Rocky and Drago at the very beginning. This is sort of one of the sins of doing a Next Generation project, where you don't give the original cast the highlights. They were afraid to put too much time on Rocky because it's Creed 2. But I wanted to see another interaction with Rocky and Drago. There needed to be an interaction between them two. There needed to be an interaction between Rocky and Apollo's widow. They are like 2 films in, and Rocky has never had a scene with Apollo's widow. Now, I imagine he talked to her, in Rocky 4 at the time of the funeral or something like that, but that was the last time he spoke to her. Why didn't we get a scene with him and Felicia Rashad? That would have been powerful. But again, it's Creed 2. It's not Rocky 8 or whatever this would be, so we can't see that scene. And again, this is the problem with a next-gen spinoff, is that when you minimize the original characters, everybody really showed up to this because of Rocky. Because if this wasn't connected to the Rocky saga, nobody would really care about Creed. I mean, yeah, you'd have maybe 20% of the people that showed up would be interested in Michael B. Jordan or a boxing picture, or the fact that maybe it was Creed's son. But you weren't going to have people showing up to this film unless they wanted to see Rocky and his interactions with Drago and his interactions with, like I said, Apollo's widow. You have to have the Rocky world accommodated in the movie. Otherwise, you're not really doing right or doing justice to the original material. Now, we'll just talk briefly about Creed 3. Rocky not in Creed 3, and it's because basically Stallone washed his hands of it, because I think Irvin Winkler, who's in charge of the Rocky pictures and MGM or something, is holding sort of the rights hostage, and Stallone wants full control. He wants his cut. He wants to leave it to his children. For whatever reason, there is some kind of legal dispute going on there. He chose to bow out of Creed 3. They chose to make it anyway. I don't mind this. They brought back Rocky's son for a cameo in the last film, and the idea is Rocky's healthy now. He's got a good relationship with his son, which is another thing, sort of like Star Wars, where the previous original trilogy had been undone to accommodate them. Again, Rocky Balboa had him on good terms with his son, and then we come around to Creed, and it's back to square one. Again, sloppy storytelling. Creed 3 I thought was very good, though. It showed that you could still do a Creed story at this point, even with the absence of Rocky. And it was still pretty good. Now, I don't really think there's rumors that there is going to be a Creed 4. I don't really think you can milk this franchise too much further without Rocky. Of course, they kept him alive, for the off chance that maybe Stallone might come back, which was a good idea. But for all intents and purposes, I think the Rocky story has been told. I think Creed's story has been told. Stallone was also flirting with possibly reviving the Rocky character in another Rocky movie that would have to do with a Hispanic boxer or something. But I think those plans are probably over now, since the feud is going on with him and MGM. So this would be, I would say, a C. It's a passing grade. It's not perfect. It does some things right. And again, it does appeal to some of the more contrived things that you have to deal with when you're doing a Next Generation spinoff. All right, next up, we've got our number 2 on the list. And this one I was very satisfied with. I was very happy with what they did with this. Ghostbusters. Now, Ghostbusters, originally 2 films with, the original cast, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, um, Ernie Hudson, and of course I had to name them all, and then I ended up forgetting Harold Ramis. That's right. So we got 2 films with the original cast. Third film never happened. There was always plans for a third one. Dan Aykroyd was trying to keep the torch going with that for a long time. Apparently, I found out years later the reason why it was never made was because of an altercation between Harold Ramis and Bill Murray on the set of Groundhog Day, when I guess Ramis pushed Murray against a wall or something because Murray was getting on his nerves or something. Again, this is all secondhand. I'm not sure exactly what happened. And the 2 kind of drifted apart, so to speak. They feuded after that. And so they made up on Ramis's deathbed. But so that's a happy ending to that story. But finally, it kind of took that before we could get a third film in the Ghostbusters franchise. Sad to say. We had a couple of video games, I think, very good video games, if I remember correctly. I have played at least one of them. And then the time came when they were going to reboot it, like just completely a different animal. And they did Ghostbusters 2016, I think it is, with an all-female cast. Everybody hated it, as expected. That was a reboot. That was not a next-gen thing, because you actually had the original cast, I think, have cameos. Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, I think, had cameos. So it wasn't like they were trying to pretend that was in the same universe or whatever. But then comes along Ghostbusters Afterlife, and Ivan Reitman's son, Jason Reitman, did a tribute basically to his father and to the Ghostbusters, and he brought back the original cast. Now, this is an important thing. Now, this is the only issue with this is I think this is kind of what, like, the prototypical reunion of a franchise is, where they start with the new characters and then they build up to the old characters. That's kind of like something that they would do, like, reminds me of like the Planet of the Apes sequel, where I think they don't really, they don't get involved with Charlton Heston until the very end, something like that. That's kind of what you do when you're just throwing in the ones, the original cast is what you're really there for, and they only throw them in at the end. That's kind of like cheating in my mind. But so the idea is we follow Egon's family. Apparently, he's the only one that had a family, but again, this is the contrivance. You have to have him have a family in order to have this story. So he apparently is the only one that went off, got married, and had a daughter. Daughter has kids, and now these kids are going to be the next generation of Ghostbusters. Now, this was when I first heard this idea, I wasn't that crazy about the idea, because I was like, well, having like 12-year-olds being Ghostbusters, it just kind of feels like it won't work. But the idea is sort of like, it reminds me of like what the original concept of Ghostbusters was. A bunch of guys that really didn't know what they were doing, and they were like building a franchise. They had to trial and error, and they knew the science behind what they were doing, but it was like this hadn't been done before. And this is kind of where we find these new kids, Mr. Goober, whatever his name is, Paul Rudd. He's a natural for something like this. It was so good that they brought him in, because he's sort of what you would expect a Ghostbuster to be in 2025 now. And the child actors are all good. I mean, I think Lucky is the only one that kind of is like, I feel like they just made her the Ernie Hudson, they made her the Winston, sort of like she's the normal person, so to speak. And, Podcast is like the Ray Stantz. He sort of got that kind of thing in his blood, obviously the girl there is Egon, and I guess that would make Finn Wolfhard Bill Murray. I don't know, but anyway. And Egon's daughter, I think, was a good. that was a good storyline that they had in Afterlife anyway, where she sort of comes to respect her father, not thinking that he was anything other than some kind of goof that, went off and went to the dirt hills of Utah or wherever they went, and then she comes to respect him at the end. Then at the end we have the Ghostbusters. Now another thing that is kind of a cheat in this is that they bring back Gozer. Gozer was supposedly already dealt with, and they bring it back. I thought Gozer was a man. They brought it back. It could be anything it wants to be. They brought it back to be sort of the big bad that they have to fight over again. But it actually led to some pretty funny stuff. You know what I mean? I think the mother and Paul Rudd turning into dogs was pretty funny, and as a callback, I think the lines Bill Murray had, with Gozer was pretty funny. So I mean, in a way, it works. You know what I mean? I don't really think that's something we could hold against it. At least I don't. I can see people complaining about that though, because it is kind of a cheat, but it worked. It worked for me. And like I said, it's a slow buildup. Now you go over to Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. This is sort of another mixed bag, like the Creed series. What happens is they actually have the Ghostbusters, the original cast, involved all throughout in this case. We get to see Ray and Winston a little bit more earlier in the film. Bill Murray shows up, I think, in the middle of the film as well, and then the whole cast gets together for the end. The only problem with this is it's another one of those situations where I think the camera is not placed at the right point. I have a feeling like they made this film a little more bloated than they needed to. If you could have just had, like, Bill Murray doing something proactive, and then you had, it feels like in many cases they just like expanded the film more than they needed to. And I think that's why it kind of has that kind of bloated feeling. But I don't think it was a bad film. I think maybe, if anything, like I said, they could have tightened the screws, made it feel like the original Ghostbusters had a little more to do in the film, and particularly at the end. But again, it was a good film, and I really hope that they do a third one. The most recent I've heard about it is Dan Aykroyd is saying that there will be a third film. He's always been trying to keep the franchise going. I believe there probably will be a third film. It'll probably be the last film, and then they probably will turn their attention to something else. I'm not sure, but I think they'll try to get at least one more film out of this one. It wasn't received that well, but I think it works well enough. I mean, for instance, they brought back the mayor. Peck is now the mayor, and you really don't have any interaction between he and Bill Murray. At the very end, like, Bill Murray calls him a clown. That's it. Why didn't they have a scene together somewhere in the middle of the movie? They needed a real scene and focus, and they didn't do that. Why do you bring back? That's the same thing as Rocky. Why do you bring back Drago? Give him one scene with Stallone, and you call it a day. And in this case, you bring back Peck, and you bring back that actor. You have him walk past the original Ghostbusters, and Murray calls him a clown. I mean, you needed to have some kind of interaction between the two. Now, maybe Bill Murray wants a light load. I don't think he wants to do a whole lot in a Ghostbusters picture. He'll hold up the proton pack, he'll shoot the ghost, he'll do a scene. Maybe that's what it was. I don't know. But the thing is, trying to get the camera where you want to see the action. I think that's been a problem with a lot of films, that they try to do a next generation thing. And I think that was kind of what went wrong here. But they did a lot of fan service. They did try to bring back a lot of the feeling of Ghostbusters, especially the animated series, which was welcome. So I appreciated that. So I would say Ghostbusters, the sort of next gen, I would give it a B+. I think they did a pretty good job. I mean, like I said, a couple of niggling little problems, but nothing really serious. So we now go to our top candidate for the best version of a next-gen series. And I think everybody's going to probably guess this already, what it is. But if you don't, Cobra Kai. Cobra Kai is the gold standard. Honestly, apart from maybe one or two things like in the last season, I was very happy with this all the way through. Now, it starts off. The only thing that kind of shook me at the beginning was it starts off being told from Johnny's point of view. Now, I'm of the opinion Daniel's the star, but this was only greenlit because it was kind of in fashion to say, oh, Johnny was, screwed over and he really should have won. And, Daniel was the antagonist of the film. And that became like a running joke. And I never really bought into that. I mean, Johnny kind of was the guy that was going to beat this kid within an inch of his life. I don't really see how he was the hero. All right, but we got that. So we got the entryway into the series. We're going to follow Johnny. And it really became a story about both these guys, Daniel and Johnny, how their, frenemy relationship carried on into middle age. And along the way, we focus on them, but we also focus on the younger cast. And the younger cast is actually interesting. Can you believe that? A lot of these spin-off type things, going back to Star Wars or how the Avengers are trying to replace, the name superheroes, these kids were actually interesting. Sam and Miguel and, Tori and Robbie and Hawk and Dimitri. All these kids had personality. All these kids had their own, hopes and dreams and aspirations. I mean, it was easy to fall in love with them. It was easy to follow them and not feel like, okay, when are we going back to Daniel? When are we going back to Johnny? And, there was an equal split. It wasn't like they just focused on the kids and were like, all right, we're going to trot out, Ralph Macchio for this scene. He'll say 5 words and then he'll go into the kitchen and then he's done for the episode. He actually had things to do. And it was a through line where you have the original cast, original characters doing things important to the story. And they brought back everybody. I mean, literally, they brought back everybody that was alive and wanted to be a part of it. I mean, they brought back Martin Kove as Kreese, a very important figure in the Karate Kid legacy. Of course, sadly, Pat Morita passed on, but his legacy is respected in this. Terry Silver being brought back, a very important character as well that everybody loved. If you hated Karate Kid 3, you still loved Terry Silver. He was great. Chosen is brought back. He's given a makeover, and that's another thing. A lot of times it fails when they bring back an old character and they try to change the character from what he originally was. But it works what they did with Chosen. I was expecting to hate it. I was surprised. I loved the nice, lovable Chosen. I was expecting to hate that idea because Chosen was he was a real bad boy. he punches Kumiko in the face, and how do you get over that? And this, no, he's great. He's great as a good guy. They bring back Bad Boy Barnes. Honestly, I think they could have done more with Bad Boy Barnes, but I mean, honestly, there really isn't a whole lot you could do. There's only so many senseis you could have. Maybe they could have made him a villain, but I think they didn't have the heart to, because one of the things that was great about Cobra Kai is they didn't fall into the trap of these are the heroes, these are the villains. They're protagonists and antagonists. They switch allegiances almost at will. I liken it to wrestling. If you've watched WWE for any length of time, there's always, the heels, there's the baby faces, and then within 6 months they'll switch around. In most cases, most wrestlers have been on both sides of the fence, and they'll have a petty rivalry with someone and then become the heel, and then that guy that was the heel by proxy looks like a babyface now because he's turned the table on the other guy. And so this is kind of what I think Cobra Kai thrived on, which was, Hawk was a good guy, then he was a bad guy, then he was a good guy again, and then we have Robbie was a good guy, then he was a bad guy, then he was a good guy again. It kept things fresh to say that, all right, these kids are not going to turn evil, but they're going to have rivalries with each other. They're going to join the other side because they think the other side's got something to offer them. Then they go back to this side when they realize they're wrong, or vice versa. And that was, again, a very fresh thing to do, to keep things going. Now, I know you can't probably do this in perpetuity, but I really felt like the show had a lot more to offer that they could have. I mean, they left us wanting more, really. I mean, like I said, you probably can't do it in perpetuity without it getting stale. But they left on a high note, too. I mean, like I said, there was a couple of things in the last season I wasn't crazy about. I felt like Tori's mother dying sort of being the catalyst to make sure that she was a Cobra Kai again. And some of it felt a little contrived, but I think that's what happens when the show lasts this long. And that's what they kind of realized. We can't keep doing this without there being some kind of feeling of we've done this before. And, the drama's kind of played out there. But again, this is how you do it. You keep the original cast an important part, a driving force. They have a lot to do with the show, and you build the story around them. You give them kids. In this case, Daniel has Sam and Anthony. Johnny has Robbie. And you have those kids, it's interesting to see how they react toward their parents as well. I mean, Sam is a little rebellious. Anthony's no angel. Robbie ends up being a bad boy, sort of like Johnny, but then again, he's actually completely 100% in the other direction by the end of the show. So, I mean, it's really interesting how you can play with those things, and you don't just make it, surface level stuff, which I feel like a lot of these other shows, like even going back to Star Wars. I mean, how invested were we in Ben Solo? I really don't feel like we got that. We needed to have seen him fall to the dark side and come back to the light side and this and that. It was just so convoluted at that point that it really didn't hit the way they wanted it to hit. But again, this is great. And I haven't seen the Karate Kid Legends movie. It was pretty much panned because it was basically a merging of the Karate Kid reboot and the, Cobra Kai / original Karate Kid universe merging. Ralph Macchio having a little bit to do in it, but not a whole lot. So, I mean, where does it go from here is where the question is. I mean, are they going to keep trying to do spin-off content with Cobra Kai? In a way, I'd like them to. But I don't know how they're going to really recapture this without, bringing everyone back. And it's possible. I mean, I think in some ways, maybe all they really need to do is wait 10 years, and then they can bring everybody back. And then we'll have, an older Daniel and an older Johnny, and you'll have the kids being mature enough to feel like you got to another stage in their life. So that could be an interesting thing to do going forward too. All right, so Cobra Kai is the gold standard as far as I see. They get an A. I would dare say an A+, but we'll stay with an A. So Cobra Kai, number 1. Number 2, Ghostbusters. Number 3, Creed / Rocky. Number 4, the MCU post-Endgame. And number 5, Star Wars. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Was there anything that you would add? Any franchisees I would have added that I missed? Let me know in the comments below. And thank you for joining us here on this lovely Saturday in November, the only way to spend your Saturday. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And until next we meet, this is Johnny Torch reminding you once again, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.